Hey, good evening everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of the Märklin Outsider. And today, as the title mentioned, I want to talk about what's known as the Märklin System. And the Märklin System basically is the powering system and the tracks they designed to go with their powering system, as well as all the accessories, which we'll probably talk about in a later episode. But Märklin is unique because, as far as HO scale goes, they're the only company that uses AC, alternating current power. Every other model train layout is DC, at least in the HO scale level. A lot of the large scales use AC current as well, and many of the old American train companies used AC until the 70s and switched over to DC. But anyhow, so what is AC and DC? All right, electricians know. It's alternating current, direct current. What's the difference? Well, obviously, alternating current fluctuates. Its symbol is a sine wave in the electronics world. Many hundreds, thousands, million times a second, the current switches back and forth, positive, negative flow, negative flow. Direct current has one flow, it flows in one direction, whereas AC bounces back and forth. This makes AC much more practical in many ways. For example, your house. I don't care if you're in China listening to this, or South Africa, or Canada, the United States, Central Europe, England, wherever you are, your house is AC. Everything you plug in is AC, it's alternating current. Why? Because alternating current is more efficient. Because the power vibrates, the current vibrates, it meets less resistance as it flows through a system. Direct current, DC, flows in one direction. That's why it's called direct. A great example of direct current is a battery. The current flows one way. You have to have the contacts, but it flows one way. It goes power in, and what happens is that's fine with a battery-operated flashlight. But in a house or in a layout, direct current, the further it gets away from the source of the power, the input, the weaker the current gets. It builds up resistance. Because it flows in one way, it gradually builds up resistance. And I don't want to turn this into an electronics thing. Somebody can explain it below, or you can Google it, AC versus DC. But as far as model trains go, or as far as your house goes, AC was and is a more efficient mode of getting electrical current throughout your system. AC was better, especially pre-digital age of the 80s. And so, an example of this is on a DC layout, and I'll use a map of my layout and pretend it's DC. A layout this big, which is 23 feet long in one point with two 8x10 and an 8x11 tables. In the old days, before digital, if this were connected DC, I would probably have to run additional current lines from my power source to different points of my track to maintain a satisfactory level of current. Because as resistance builds up, the further you get away from that point where the power is coming into your track, the further you get away from it, because of DC current, the more resistance it builds up and it loses power. So you would have dead areas. Any kid who built an old Tyco or Lionel train set in America knows that if you built it big enough, there was a point on the other side of the track where the train slowed down. And what you would have to do is you'd have to crank up that dial to get that train to go a little faster through there. And then it would speed back up as it got closer to the source of the power again. The problem with that is in original DC current, you were actually increasing the amount of voltage and amperage going through your track. You were increasing the electric flow, which is dangerous, but it also would blow out the motors of these trains if you went too far. So you had dead areas, and the only way to beat the dead areas was to run power lines, run your electrical lines to the other side of the track as well, and basically have multiple contact points. And anybody who runs a DC analog layout today still does that, because they're going to have dead spots. Another issue with DC is in something known as a reverse loop. A reverse loop, and here's a picture of one. A reverse loop is simply where you have a loop where the train goes around through a turnout and then comes back and goes the other direction through that same turnout on the same track. With DC, because it's direct current, you're basically sending the power back into itself. That creates outages. You're going to have what we call shorts. It's going to short out your system because you're sending the power back into itself. So reverse loops needed to be isolated or insulated. And that meant you had to install special things to stop the current and create a mini dead spot where, as the train's coming through, the current didn't follow it. So part of the train would be powered from one side, and then as it's coming through the turnout, it catches the power on the other side. But you had to have that little dead area in the middle. And if you watch anybody's video who does DC track, they talk about that. They've got to create these little dead zones where to make sure the flow goes only to a point. Otherwise, it'll short out the trains. All right. AC doesn't have that problem because AC vibrates and fluctuates. The current's going both ways anyhow. It doesn't affect that. You could have a straight loop and not worry about it. This also leads to the trains being wired differently. For example, DC model trains, and again, we're only talking HO here, required insulated wheels. Part of the wheel, the axle, had to be insulated because one side's positive, one side's negative or ground, and the wheels had to be grounded differently to do that. And what happens is, to get the train to go the other way, you had to flip a button which changed the direction of the current, because it can only flow one way, and thus you had to have these insulated tires that could accept the change in the current direction to get the train to go back and forth. AC trains didn't need that. They don't need the insulated tires, because on AC track, the two outer rails are actually both grounds, and the main current flows through the middle. So the Märklin system uses AC current, and they really are the only ones. Other companies make AC products for Märklin, but Märklin really is the only company in HO scale that uses AC powering system for their layouts. Now, today in the digital world, the issue of adding amperage or voltage through your power supply into your track is no longer an issue, because now these computers, these control systems, they maintain an even flow, although DC can still have dead areas, so you still have to wire more. AC can have some dead areas too, but it's usually not because of the distance, it's because of a bad piece of track or a bad contact or something like that. But anyhow, DC tracks still have to have that power, have to have additional power lines throughout the track to maintain a consistent current. And you have to do a lot more isolation and a lot more wiring. AC requires less wiring. And so the Märklin system plays on that. You do less wiring, and they have what we call the 3-rail system. So I just want to show you a quick example of a Märklin track, and we'll talk about the 3-rail system and what it does, and also the negative side of having Märklin AC, because if AC is such a positive benefit over DC, why are so many train systems DC instead of AC when AC seems to be better? We'll talk about that as well. All right, so here on one of my sideboard working tables, I have just a couple of pieces of Märklin C-Track. Now, Märklin today makes
two types of track. There's what is called C-Gleis or C-track, and that's what you see before you. That's what I use. And then here's a quick picture of what's called C-Gleis or K-track. The track is not pre-bedded. C-track comes with basically some ballastine already built onto it. And this is Märklin's go-to. A lot of people don't like it because it's not very realistic. But we'll talk about C-track versus K-track a little bit more later. But C-track or K-track, regardless of which ones, and I'll pick up the straight here. If you can see this, I'm going to try to hold it up here. C-track and K-track have these rows of nubs right here. There is a row of nubs going across here. I don't know what's the best way to see it. But this is technically your third rail. Now, in the old days, this was actually a rail. If you could go into a closet and grab an old American Tyco, if you're an American, grab an old Tyco system or that, you'd actually see a third rail here. And they didn't look very realistic, which is one reason why AC three-rail tracks were not popular. But these nubs stick up, and the idea is that, hey, when you look at the side, you don't see the nubs anyhow. But this is your third contact, and this is actually your power line. These two rails are actually grounds, where with DC track, one of these rails would be your hot line and one would be your ground. But in AC three-rail system, these are both grounds, and your power source is actually through here. Now, what makes these tracks special, besides the fact that they're nubs, because again, in the old days you would have had, I'm trying to get this to focus so you can see those nubs sticking up. You can see them going across the middle. What makes this special is that with these pre-bedded, you can hide a lot of wiring in here. You have here in the middle is this, your hot line, your power line, the third rail, and it is through plastic and other things separated from your two ground lines. But then everything is connected at each end of these clips here, and this is how your tracks run power. But they are designed to have these little phalanges here that you can plug things into directly here. You don't have to run 10 miles of wire under your track. You can connect it here. That's the advantage of C-track over K-track, let's say. The disadvantage, obviously, it isn't very realistic. But what this allows you to do is that you actually have three contact points. So with an AC model train, a Märklin System train, you are less likely to have shorts or dead areas because there's three contact points instead of just two. You don't need insulated or dead wheels or sections to protect it. Everything is live. And so you have all these contact points. What's the disadvantage then? Well, it's how you make this contact point. And this is where one of the reasons where the realism factors in, but also another factor. Let me pick up a Märklin locomotive and show you how the Märklin system then works. All right. Any Märklin or Märklin-friendly locomotive, AC ready, has this ski. Okay, this little slide bar. That ski connects, well, it doesn't connect. It contacts those nubs in the middle. When it goes on and everything lines up, that ski, so I think you can see it, the ski runs along and completes the circuit and gives the power to the locomotive, the car, the train, whatever has the ski. But you have to have this ski here. And that's how it runs the system. So you not only have your wheels, which are non-insulated, and thus allows full contact and full power, but you have the ski. Well, that's also the drawback. The ski is not realistic, okay? No train has a ski. Actually, that's a lie. There's actually some real trains that do have a third rail pickup in the world, but to model train enthusiasts, there is not a good reason for the ski as far as realism goes. So this is not necessarily popular, but anybody who makes a train for Märklin, it has to have this ski. And what happens is that this ski doesn't look very realistic, but the argument that Märklin people would say is, hey, when it's on the track, you don't see it because it's below the rail. Let me pull this up again. And see, once it's on the rail, once the wheels are on the rail, you don't really see the ski. You're not going to see it when it's moving. So what's the big deal? You're not going to see it. And I'm actually using a Lux cleaning car, but it was here. And rather than take one of my locomotives off their train, since they're all out of my layout, I did this. So you don't see it. But here's the other negative. That sound. Purists hate it. Purists hate that sound because as the ski runs along these nubs, it's going to make a scraping sound. Now, the running of the locomotive, especially if you use sound, if you have digital sound, it tends to drown it out anyhow. But as these skis wear out, and yes, at times you'll have to replace them, but as they wear out, they get noisier. And sometimes they will break off and jam. Also, if the train derails, they can create a, let's move this up here. If the train derails, they then can create a short because they'll cross over onto your ground lines. They'll cross both ground lines and create a fault short. So that is the Märklin system, the good and the bad. You would have to play with it yourself and decide which one you like or don't like.
So that is a very quick look at what is called the Märklin system. AC track with an AC powering system. Again, there are pros and cons. If you're into Märklin, you have to weigh these. I personally think there's more pros than cons. A lot less wiring, especially if you use C-Track. A lot less wiring. Less dead zones. Not complete elimination of dead zones, especially if you build a long layout, because you can get a bad track, the contact's not as good, just like with a bad fish plate or something, or whatever other issue, a faulty soldering job on a power line somewhere. You can have mistakes, but in general, AC is a more efficient powering system. Now, originally, both systems, you increased the voltage or the ampage into the line. But AC, you didn't have to do it as much because it allows for more contact, cleaner contact, more efficient contact. So AC was a better system. Why is DC 80% of the market then in HO scale? Because really, outside of Central Europe, the people that love Märklin, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, Switzerland, a little bit of France, and in the Czech Republic. There is such a divide between DC and AC. Why is DC the dominant? Because in the end, money dictates. DC, as far as train systems and track, it's cheaper, okay? You're running 2 rails and not 3. You're saving money just in the construction cost of rail. You're not adding a ski. DC is just less expensive. Even though AC is more efficient and AC is has all these benefits, in the end, money talks. Think the Sony Betamax versus VHS, for those of you old enough to remember that. The Betamax was better in many ways, but the VHS system was cheaper. There were other differences. But in the end, AC has its fans and it's not going to change. And it's still the dominant system in Central Europe. And Märklin rules. And Märklin controls a big enough market, even in this day. Go back and see episode 1 when I talked about their history. Even in this day, that AC is not going away. Märklin has a huge chunk, and other top train companies will make, at least for the European market, will make trains for the Märklin system because it's the only way they're going to sell trains. They'll sell DC in many places, and there's plenty of people in Germany and so forth that do DC trains. But in the end, Märklin owns that market in Central Europe, and AC is their way of going. If you want to have all these great advantages down the road, then going Märklin AC is not a bad way to go. Just know that you can't go to most of your local train shops, especially in central United States or anywhere else, and just pick up AC parts. You're going to be doing a lot of online buying. If you live on the coast, East Coast or West Coast, or big city like Chicago or down in Florida, where they do have more European import-oriented systems, then yes, you can get Märklin things there. As I've mentioned in many videos, pretty much every local shop nearby that ran trains, AC or DC, has closed. I've got to drive almost 2 hours if I want to just pick up AC track, Märklin specifically. So that is the downside. But in Europe, Märklin rules. On mainland Europe, Märklin is the dominant force. AC is the way to go. There's many pros to it. The cons are, how much is that realism? How much is that ski going to bother you? The sound of that ski and the cost, because AC systems cost more. Anywhere from 10% to 30% more for locomotives, for track. Heck, Märklin C-Track probably costs 2 times, almost double, sometimes in some cases, like for points and that, maybe triple what you would pay to get a basic turnout or piece of track for a DC system. So anyhow, we're going to talk in episode 3 more about Märklin track specifically. We're going to talk specifically about C-Track and go from there. So this was episode 2. I will see you back for episode 3. Don't forget, we still will be doing the other show, 2015 Me, and I will be uploading and continuing the Model Train Outsider series, our video blogs. But so far, it's just me and you here talking about the Märklin system. So, auf Wiedersehen.